Welcome back for another episode of Scaling Sustainability Impact, a Siemens podcast for industry. This is part 2 of our conversation between Eryn Devola and Tutt, the heads of sustainability at Siemens Digital Industries and industry strategy at Siemens Digital Industry Software. In the last episode, we looked at how businesses are implementing sustainability in their own operations, but another key piece to really complete a sustainability strategy is the consideration of the full supplier ecosystem and the supply chain that serves any modern product. They're already getting far more complex with modern products, but how can companies account for these large and complex supply chains when dealing with sustainability?
Yeah, and I think you mentioned the word a couple of times, is that they're really complex. And I think that, first of all, it's getting more transparency, and it's helpful to have a supply chain that's working in your same direction. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I have responsibility for our products that we manufacture at Siemens and what the supply chain there is. And it's very helpful if you have suppliers that are already committed to working in the collaborative way that you need to be working in the future and who are working towards similar sustainability related targets as you are, so that you know as you're moving in that direction, they're also moving in that direction. But inevitably, you need solutions that can help you exchange data in a secure and confidential way. And those are some of those blockchain technologies that are coming. You need to be able to visualize that data. And then you need to together say, hey, the biggest impacts are in whatever it is in your supply chain, and then kind of come together to be able to work on that. And that requires, being able to turn data into decisions that we talked a little bit about, and really thinking outside the borders of your current business the way that you see it. Because ultimately, the manufacturer of that product in a lot of these new legislative environments is going to be responsible for the whole thing, not just the piece that they played.
Yeah, I think that's a very critical part of it, that the manufacturer is ultimately responsible. And I think as you're making these design trade-offs, or as you're making trade-offs in your production processes, and you're thinking about where your products are going to come from, that it's not just the sustainability, let's say the carbon footprint of the parts or components that you're getting from a supplier, but the carbon footprint of what it takes to transport it to your factory and integrate it into your production lines. And so, these companies model this, I've called this the digital twin of your business process. We talk about it of the product a lot, but at some level, you're creating a simulation. You have a simulation. You have data around how your business is, how the supply chain is bringing parts into your business, and so again, you now have data. You have a way to visualize that data with real models, and then you can start to make better decisions and make those trade-offs that really incorporate both cost and schedule and the sustainability of those parts that you bring into your factory operations. And so I think it's the digital twin of your business process, if I'm going to coin a phrase there, but it really is understanding your business processes and be able to visualize them. So a big part of that with the data that you have.
Yeah, maybe one example that kind of supports that is we were recently talking to a beverage manufacturer, and they were really focused on their distribution chain, which is not necessarily something that they own, but that's where their biggest CO2 is coming from right now. And they're looking to electrify that. And that may not be their traditional beer making focus, but they're, again, having to use a digital twin for performance type model and look at that entire value chain of that product.
Yeah, great point. I mean, I saw another example here recently, Eryn. I love that about the food and beverage, but even in some of these other industries like heavy equipment, that they, when they look at the carbon footprint of their products, 90% or more of that carbon footprint occurs once the product leaves their factory and is delivered to a customer, because someone's going to use that tractor or that crane or that mining truck for 20 years, and so really understanding the operations and where they're seeing the impact is critical for these companies, because that's they've got to be responsible for all of that.
Yep. And in contrast, like when we talk to industries like chemical, they have such high energy usage within their own facilities. They're really focused on that scope 1 and scope 2, or their own energy use, and then the source of that energy. And so when you look at each industry, they really a lot of them tend to have different focuses based on their value chain and where their impacts are. So getting, traceability or transparency to that data is so important.
Absolutely.
So I think to wrap up our discussion, let's take a look at let's continue looking at this industry point of view. From your perspective, what are the goals of each of the major industries for sustainability? What are they working on right now? You mentioned chemical, you mentioned consumer product and heavy industry, but are there some other ones that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I as I think about some of the different industries that we work with, automotive, for example, there's certainly a lot of movement towards electric vehicles right now. But there's also a lot of focus on how do they complete more testing via simulation instead of, in the real world, which reduces the amount of material usage and in their own manufacturing and development processes. But understanding how how their cars work with with the electric cars and being able to use that information to optimize their operations and the battery life of their cars is a big focus. Aerospace, kind of the same thing. A lot of sophisticated modeling. There's a lot of movement towards electric-powered aircraft right now, especially in the urban air mobility where you're seeing the air taxis. That model will work really well on many of the short hops that you're doing within an urban area. But for some of the longer haul, there are companies that are looking at battery-driven aircraft right now for regional aircraft, but you're starting to see investigation in a lot of development work right now in the sustainable aviation fuels, but also in hydrogen as you look to the future. And that might be a real opportunity for aircraft, especially these long range aircraft, that hydrogen may actually be a better solution for the long term. So we see that industrial machinery, they're looking at how do they improve the factory operations. Electronics and semiconductors, really understanding the traceability and of all their materials and the components. And there's a lot of chemical-like processes in those processes. And so they're looking at how do they manage all of those process operations throughout their supply chain. So we're seeing in a lot of industries, some industries very far along, but in their journey, but others are just now starting to move into that. So that's some of the things I've been seeing across some of our different industries. I don't know, Eryn, you have also been seeing a lot of this. What are your thoughts on that?
I want to call back to what you had talked about with automotive doing testing via simulation, because, we talk a lot about the environmental piece of sustainability, but there's also a big piece around people-centricity and societal impact. And one of the things I love about being able to do more simulation in automotive and to some extent aerospace testing, I was reading an article that was talking about how when you've got test dummies and you're doing these crash testing, that they're all calibrated for one gender, one size. And when you move into a simulation environment, you can now better customize and understand the wide range of impacts that happen if the size of your passenger changes or if the weight of your passenger changes. And I think this ability to really get more with less investment and all the reasons why they standardized on one size because of testing and because of this limitation. I think there's a real, in both those industries, a passenger safety improvement that comes along with a lot of simulation that is also part of long-term sustainability.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think back to my days in aerospace, and we had 6 models of people for that, how we modeled them as we're in, say, the cockpit of the airplane, and that's what we designed it around. But there's a lot more variation among people than the 6 or 7 test use cases that we had for that. So you really can do so much more with modeling, and you can look at so many. Even in aerospace, when we think about the amount of time that we spent in flight test, that we could only look at a handful of points, but we could look at, with simulation, we could really look at the full envelope and really make all of our testing much more effective. And so because we were able to focus on some of the critical areas. So the simulation, I think, especially in aerospace and automotive, you're seeing it is really transforming how they do business, how they're developing their new products now. And we're starting to see that in a lot of the other industries as well as they develop their products, really relying more and more on the simulation to test it out and prove it out.
Tony, it's a great time to be a design engineer.
Yes, it is. Always come back. It's good to be a design engineer.
That sounds like a really good place to wrap up. But do you guys have any thoughts? What should the listener remember from the discussion?
I think the big thing is that sustainability can't be a bolt-on. It really needs to be integrated into business process. And that along with that it can feel quite daunting, but there are steps that can be taken along the way. Look to your left, look to your right, find a good partner because you're going to need them to get there.
Yeah, that's a great thing to remember. I think for me, when I think about industry and my experience that, a really key on what Eryn said there, that it has to be part of your DNA. It has to be something that you're doing as a matter of practice, because if you're just doing it at the end, you just add a lot of, drive a lot of cost into your programs, into your business operations, and you don't get all the sustainability benefit that you could. And so you have to think about it holistically from as part of all of your business operations, and leverage the tools. It's to help make it easier, because as Eryn said, it looks so daunting when you start looking at there's so much information, so many more things I have to consider now. But when you think about, your people and the processes that you're using and the technology that you can bring forward to help solve these problems, there's a way to get it done. And really, the outcomes often are beyond what, customers first think when they start to go down this sustainability journey.
Well, I want to thank the both of you for joining us today, and I want to thank all of our listeners. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our future episodes of Scaling Sustainability Impact. We'll be back next episode with a recorded discussion with Eryn Devola and Nan Kochar to focus on how the automotive industry is handling sustainability as an additional business requirement. And as always, you can check out our website with the link in the description to learn more about Siemens Sustainability Solutions.